Oh, hey! Those Canucks won a hockey game last night.
They did.
Although, I gather I didn't see it, but I gather it wasn't that easy. They were down in Seattle, and they got outshot
Yeah,
36-18. But sounds like the goaltender probably did a good job.
he did. They've been outshot by wide margins twice this week, including Monday against Carolina when they fell to 0-5-2. But they have their first win of the season. It was a back and forth game. I think all of British Columbia got a little nervous when the Kraken scored with 35 seconds left to make it a 1-goal game because, Bob, they set an NHL record this year. They blew multi-goal leads in their first 4 games to lose them all. No one had ever done that in NHL history. They blew another lead in the 5th game, although that was only 1 goal. And at the home opener here on Saturday, the fans booed them off the ice, and 4 jerseys hit the ice.
They should have booed them off the ice. They lost to the Buffalo Sabres, and that was their worst game of the year, Matt. They were awful.
Yeah. Well, and they've had a couple of stinker third periods here at home, John, when games were there and available, 1-goal games. So, they haven't inspired yet on home ice, but they do have a road win against their natural geographic rivals. And frankly, they've been tremendous in that building and against the Kraken. They have owned the Cascadia rivalry here for as limited as it has been.
So our pal Rutherford goes on Hockey Night last Saturday and utters the word of all words in Vancouver. Yeah. And by the way, I don't think there isn't a time in his life that he hasn't done anything without a plan. Mm-hmm. So when Jimmy Rutherford says rebuild, the town starts to swoon.
Yeah.
And it's been the discussion point all week now.
It has, John, because rebuild has been so elusive here. Like, there was a period of time when Trevor Linden was running the franchise when he would go out of his way to avoid even using the term. And then there was a brief period of time after the Sedins retired where he did use the term. And then lo and behold, Trevor Linden was no longer a part of the Vancouver Canucks front office. They won the President's Trophy in back-to-back years, 2011 and in 2012. In 2012, they lost a disappointing first-round series to the LA Kings in 5 games. They ran it all back the next year, got swept in the first round by the San Jose Sharks. Really, since that year, you can argue that a rebuild of this franchise has been necessary. And instead, ownership and multiple management groups have always chosen a year-to-year plan. Our friend Ray Ferraro used to call it the no plan, that just every year you go out in the summer hoping to improve your hockey club and make the playoffs the next year. And so a lot of Canucks fans here in this province have been asking for some time now, hey, what is it about this year-to-year management just trying to get to the playoffs? How about taking it down to the studs and doing a proper rebuild and trying to build a contender one day, like we've seen in Colorado and in other markets?
And the fans in British Columbia would tolerate that.
Oh, absolutely. I think so. I think a broad section of the fan base would not only tolerate that, would embrace that, John. I gotta say, I disagreed with what you said yesterday on local television here about the fans not wanting that. I think Canadian hockey fans are the most sophisticated going. I remember, working back in Toronto pre-salary cap day, and the notion was the big Canadian markets could never rebuild it. And that's something that I agreed with. But I think what we've seen under the cap era is that competitiveness is cyclical. You're probably going to have to spend a lot of young assets if you're going to be a contender and hoist the Stanley Cup. And then after you're done in that cycle, it is time to be bad for a few years, collect young players and draft picks, and see if you can take advantage of some of that cheap labor. I think other sports are going that way too. You look at baseball with the Astros and the Cubs and what they were able to do. So yeah, I look, it's 9 years on, John, so it would be awfully late, and you could understand why Jim Rutherford used the word patience last week, that maybe he's a little worried about, whether the fans would be patient here through a rebuild. But I do think there's a large portion of the fan base who believes that's necessary and has believed that to be necessary.
And they'll still go to games. They'll still go to the games when the rebuild is going on.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, put it this way, a few years ago, they weren't necessarily going to games because the Canucks, had a whole bunch of journeymen there and weren't necessarily entertaining. Yeah. If you're talking about losing some season ticket holders, if you did a to the studs rebuild, yeah, I could see that. Yeah, I could see that as well. So you have this, balance that ownership has to strike between, a few extra tickets on a game-to-game basis, or legitimately creating a contending club. And they
It's
haven't
more
had
than
that in more than a
it's
decade.
it's more than a few extra tickets, Matt. It's every level of corporate, it's every level of TV rights, which are up, by the way. So there's a whole plethora of things that you'd have to rethink.
So the one thing that Vancouver doesn't have in the same measure as Toronto is it does not have the huge corporate base. So, you are selling to more, Joe and Joanne Publix here than you are in, say, Toronto.
But part of the dilemma, at least, is the performance of this team over the last 50 games last year after Gabby came in.
Yep.
This team played really well and damn near made it to the playoffs.
Mhm.
And I think that took the general manager by surprise and delayed any decisions that he might have made. You got to believe that when he took over, which was basically the same time as the coach, his plan was, okay, we got to take this back down to the studs and start over again. And then this team starts to play like crazy and he goes, well, maybe not. Maybe I was wrong. So now you've got 7-8 games into the season and you've got one victory, but you've had leads in a whole bunch of games.
7 of 8, Bob.
What does that
7
mean?
of 8.
Yeah. What does that mean? That means something too, doesn't it?
Oh, it means they're capable. There's no question that on paper, this Canucks team is probably the best they've had in a number of years. At its best, and at full health, this is a really good looking top 9 forward group that's got, I think, a lot of goals in them and a pretty lethal power play as well. And the goaltender Thatcher Demko is clearly one of the 10 best goaltenders in the world, and we're wondering if he can make that step and be one of the 5 best or even 3 best and be a Vezina finalist here coming up. He has not had his A game this year. You're exactly right with the analysis from last year, Bob. There have been 3 different events over the last decade that a lot of people have red circled here as things that were great in the moment, but wound up setting the club back because it inspired a hope and a faith that really wasn't there. One was making the playoffs in 2015. They had a fabulous year under rookie head coach Willie Desjardins. They lost in the first round against Calgary, but that sort of fueled some hope that, maybe we can retool this thing on the fly. Maybe we don't have to rebuild. Then they got to the bubble playoffs a couple of years ago. They won the play-in series against Minnesota. They destroyed St. Louis, who were the defending Stanley Cup champions at the time, and got to a game 7, nearly got through Vegas into the Western Conference final. And people looked at that and went, wow, they're pretty close. Well, then the pandemic, as you know, had effects on revenues, and the Canucks allowed Jacob Markstrom and they allowed Chris Tanev to walk. That was the one summer that ownership didn't spend on the team. And the management and the coaching staff and the team at the time felt that they were closer than they were. And the next thing you know, here comes more losing. So they've had these sort of dalliances with competitiveness over the last decade that have fueled optimism that at the end of the day hasn't really proven true.